Hello and welcome to the first episode of many to come on the Dyad Cycle Channel's book review series. Time is the most valuable asset we have as mortals, so I thank you all for sharing some of your time with me. In order to preserve as much time as possible, let me just quickly say, if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing if you wish to see more. Before we truly begin, let me give a brief disclosure. These book reviews are not, by any means, a professional assessment, but rather an amateuresque one of my own subjective opinion, with as much objectivity as I can possibly muster. I'm still human. That being said, my thoughts and opinions on works of art, as with anyone else's, are subjective. If you have differing opinions, I'd love to read and debate them. Please feel free to share them in the comment section below. With the introduction finally out of the way, let's get to the review. Today we'll be weighing upon the scale of my judgment the first book of the Xanth series by the famously known fantasy author Piers Anthony. He's also known as Piers Xanthony. His book, A Spell for Chameleon, was the first in the Xanth series. The video will be divided into 4 main sections. The first section is this long-winded introduction. Next, there will be a spoiler-free review as the second section. Consider this your first spoiler warning. A more detailed review, with spoilers included, will be the third section of this video. If you wish to skip the spoiler section of this video, use the timestamps to skip past the third section of the video. From there, we'll go straight into section 4, which is the score section, where I average out the total score of all 4 categories. There, I'll also decide whether or not I personally recommend this book, as well as what type of audience I believe would appreciate this book most. As with all my book reviews, I'll be focusing my judgment upon 4 main categories. Prose and world building is the first. I'm aware there are many different types of prose, but for the purpose of these book review videos, we're going to rely on a more Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. That being, the ordinary language that the writer uses to directly communicate and convey the world, concepts, ideas, characters, and story to the reader. I include in this category how well the author was able to maintain immersion, their ability to paint a compelling mental picture for the reader, as well as how easy or difficult it is to digest their writing. The second category is pacing, which, defined in these reviews, is how well the timing and momentum of the story feels, chapter by chapter, page by page, how well each paragraph and chapter propels the story forward, and if there is any unnecessary verbal fluff stagnating the momentum. The third category is character development. I believe this category is self-explanatory, but for the sake of the audience, I'll define it in my own terms. How well the story depicts the meaningful growth of individual characters from their introduction into the story until the story ends. The last category is the motif, or multiple motifs if there happen to be more than one. What underlying concepts were consistent throughout the story, what was the main motif, and did it culminate meaningfully at the end of the story? We're finally moving on to section 2. This part of the review is without spoilers. If you wish for a more detailed review, spoilers included, skip to section 4 of the video. If I get enough requests in the comments below for a more detailed spoiler-filled review, I'll gladly reread the book and give a spoiler-filled comparison with other works that I'm familiar with that may have reminded me of some of the elements in this book. Category 1. The world building and prose. Piers Anthony has a minimalistic way of communicating his stories through his writing. I rather enjoy it. I like that there's not too much gilding the lily. It has a very personal feel towards it. I believe he balances his prose moderately well, keeping the writing entertaining throughout the story, but he allows for the reader to fill in much of the details with their own imagination. So if you don't enjoy that type of style that depicts every minuscule detail of every scene, then don't worry. I think this book would be good for you because he doesn't go into too much detail explaining the little details of every scene. Category 2, the pacing. Each chapter was meaningfully developing the story forward, which for less experienced readers will feel much more satisfaction in completing each chapter. There's a lot that happens in each chapter, and there's not a lot of time spent idle for the character. If you're a more experienced type of reader who enjoys more descriptive language and a more subtle pace, this book will probably feel rushed and lacking. It is a smaller book, so I can see that he needed to accomplish a lot with each chapter. It maintained a good balance to keep readers enthralled in what was happening presently while reading the story, and it kept you wanting to turn the page to find out what happened next, and the chapters weren't too long, so it felt easy to accomplish each chapter. I will say that it does take a little bit of time for the story to gain momentum, but once it picks up around the middle of the book, it is a relentless pace at times. I almost felt as if so much was happening and it was difficult to gain a coherent grasp of exactly how much time or distance was traveled or how much time was passing between each chapter. Section 3, character development. From the beginning of the story to the end, the main character's personality is adequately and effectively conveyed. The description of him is physically left rather bare minimum. I believe this was intentionally done to allow for the reader to personify themselves in the main character. Piers does a good job of using minor supporting characters and the main character's relationship with them as a device to develop the main character. Some of the main supporting characters are not truly introduced until we're about halfway through the story, and Piers does a wonderful job of subverting the reader's expectations with their development. They're also given meaningful growth from their introductions and background descriptions until the end of the story. Throughout the middle and end of the book, Piers sprinkles throughout little hints as to the true nature of the solution to the main conflict for the main character. There are a couple reoccurring motifs throughout the book: family, duty to one's country. I believe the main one is something along the lines of loving and accepting yourself with the gifts that you already have, or the gifts that you may think you do not have. So something about counting your blessings and being grateful for what you do have, as opposed to being envious of the personal gifts that other people may possess. Even with your limited gifts, you're able to carve out an existence for yourself with your own unique strengths. One of the other recurring themes was being able to rewrite one's destiny, to not allow the hand of fate that you're dealt with to determine your worth or to determine your future. We see this with the main character as well as with the two main supporting characters. Piers also touches on the value of character and one's own integrity, which I personally love. Refusing to compromise one's honor, to do the right thing, even if you can get away with it. I think in today's society, character and integrity are easily compromised in the name of clout or short-term gain. It's not as valued as it once was in society, or at least in America. We're moving on to the third section of the video, and this is your final spoiler warning. Moving forward, there are spoilers ahead, so if you do not wish for some of the elements of the story to be spoiled, skip ahead to the fourth section of the video. I'm going to do a compliment sandwich here, with the good, the not so good, and the great about the book. The good. Piers Anthony is very creative with using magical flora for multiple purposes, to create tension and very real dangers in the land, as well as useful plants for the people who live there to use. Carnivorous plants that seemingly have a unique personality of their own depending on their functions and manner of catching prey. I thought that was beautifully written. He creatively incorporates many that vary greatly from the mundane with magical properties to the fantastical that derive inspiration from already existing methods that some plants use to catch their prey. The not so good. Most of the magical fauna that Piers Anthony has in this story overly rely on ones taken from classical fairy tales, such as centaurs, unicorns, dragons, manticores, and such. The ones that are of his own creation are not really described in a manner which makes it easy to depict a clear image of the monsters in the reader's head. Many of the descriptions were so minimal that I had a hard time trying to use my own imagination to picture them. And this did ruin some of the immersion that is otherwise well built. This is a side effect of his minimalistic prose that allows for the reader to impose their own imagination to fill in the blanks. But I would have liked to see much more creativity in this aspect, much more explanation on how the monsters look. If you've created magic and have the freedom to create your own magical creatures, I would have also liked to see more magical creatures created by the artist's own imagination. There's nothing wrong with relying on classical creatures like unicorns and such. Another thing that could have been better, the scale of the land which he created is relatively small. I believe the land could have had much more to it with a much grander scale. I'm curious to see how this series develops and if we'll have much more to see in this world. And the whole story takes place within the span of a month or maybe 2 or 3. The main character had traveled from the north to the east, and then they traverse into the south central part of the country. Then they went to the northern border, so they pretty much hit all 4 corners. They even went through oceans and back to the southwestern coast. This made an awesome introduction to the world of Xanth. It felt as though it was a land dominated with wildlands and inhospitable forests. There was no grandiose capital and very few human settlements scattered throughout. I would have liked to see different types of landscapes where many different populations made their home and how different ecosystems kept a balance with one another. I hope that he touches more on this in future books. The great things that I thought were amazing. I loved the way he ties the title of the book to the final conclusion and motif. It's masterfully done. You can tell that the title of the book, A Spell for Chameleon, is kind of nondescript. By the time you're 2/3 of the way through, you start to come to the realization about the title of the book. And he ties it up well at the end. Piers seemingly had a clear picture in his head of how he wanted to neatly wrap up the entire novel since the first few pages of the book. He keeps you invested from chapter to chapter. The payoff from the nail-biting tension of the last few chapters is extremely gratifying. I very much enjoyed how he subverted expectations with the evil magician trope and how realistically portrayed the King of Xanth was portrayed in the book. If anything, I felt the book was a little short and I was longing for more, but that's what a good book does. It makes you wish there was more chapters to read. I was certainly sad to have to put the book down when the story was finished. I'm excited to learn that at the time of writing this review, there are dozens more stories in the world of Xanth, and I greatly look forward to my next escape from reality, from the plain world of the mundane, to my next great adventure in the wonderfully fantastical world that Piers Anthony has created. Moving on to section 4. At the time of writing this script, I've given this about a week before deciding to give it a score to really digest the book and let my thoughts and opinions settle. A lot of the times we're so quick to be like, wow, it was amazing, 10 out of 10. But, after a little bit of time, you kind of start to have a more realistic score in mind. The ending of the book was so gratifying that, we tend to score a book a little bit high because those are the last emotions that you have. Or if the rest of the book was amazing and the ending was not so good, we tend to score the book low just because the end of the book didn't tie it up in a gratifying manner. But that doesn't change that it wasn't a well-written work of art. So for his prose and world building, I would say Mr. Anthony creates a wonderfully colorful world filled with magic and monsters that he pulled inspiration from familiar fairy tales. His minimalistic prose worked well because they were creatures that I think people could be familiar with if they have read some classical fairy tales or dealt in the realm of the fantastical before. I like that his prose is minimalistic compared to more wordy authors, and this balances well with one's own imagination. He doesn't oversaturate with descriptive language, but still manages to illustrate a magical picture. But sometimes his descriptions can be a little lacking, And the scale of Xanth seems a little small. This can ruin some of the amazing immersion he's built up, in that they were able to go from coast to coast, border to border of the entire world of Xanth within a short amount of time. So with those 2 points in mind, I'm going to deduct a little bit and say that I'll give his prose and world building a solid 8.0. Pacing. Let's be honest, pacing is one aspect of writing that even the masters can easily miss the perfect mark. The tempo picks up rather quickly, and so much of the adventure is condensed towards the last 8 to 10 chapters. So much happens in the last third of the book that from chapter to chapter it's hard to remember exactly how we got here. I personally would have liked a slightly slower pace, but for readers who love a fast-moving story and who don't like chapters that are excruciatingly long, this is a book that you'll love. For that, I give the pacing a solid 7.5. Character development. It's one of the areas where Piers' talent truly shines. His personal touch on each one of the personalities of all the different characters breathes a realistic essence of life into each of them. Most of them feel unique enough to be their own person, and outstanding and meaningful growth and depiction for each character. For this, he gets a solid 9. His character development is definitely something to learn from. He does a great job, especially in a short amount of time, conveying realistic growth. Motif. As I stated before, I enjoyed some of the recurring themes of like manifesting one's own destiny and taking back control from the hands of fate, fighting a fate that's written in stone, carving one's own niche in the world with the gifts and talents one already possesses, not compromising one's character or integrity for worldly desires, things like honor, loyalty. These were all outstanding themes represented throughout the book, and they tied in beautifully, especially in the last chapter. In this section, Piers Anthony gets his highest score of all the categories, a near perfect 9.5. Final score, 34 out of 40, or 85. Future LJ here. I'll pop in every now and then to address past LJ's shortcomings. That guy is always making me carry his weight. I realized while editing the outro that I had forgotten a few things. Number 1, quick update on the book. We're projected to have it around 40 chapters, and we're starting chapter 22, so it's coming along page by page. I forgot to mention whether or not I personally recommend the book, but by the tone of the rest of the video, I'm sure you can tell that yes, I personally recommend this book. The paperback copy is only around 345 pages, and it has a strong male and female protagonist. So if your reading level is around high school or above, then you'll probably enjoy this book. I know the rest of the video might seem a little boring, or perhaps like I'm stiff when I'm talking. Bear with me, I'm learning and it's only my first video. If you have any tips, tricks, comments, or feedback, please drop a comment. Also, any recommendations for future book reviews are always welcome. We made it to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you wish to see more book reviews in the future, hit that subscribe button and toggle on the notifications bell. If you wish to support us in our endeavor to self-publish, please consider donating via Patreon. The link is in the intro and in our channel's description. Any help at all is massively appreciated. I'll say it once more before I go. Time is the most valuable asset we have as mortals. So if you made it this far into the video, you have my sincere thanks for sharing with me some of yours. May the Great Mother guide you, and may the Great Father shine upon you. Till next time.